Hi there, this is Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. My name is Ian Willoughby. My guest in this episode is Pavlína Louženská, a trend forecaster who helps banks, startups and other organisations understand likely developments in the coming years and plan accordingly. As you'll hear very soon, my conversation with Pavlína takes in the methods that she employs to predict the future, why Czechs may be less bothered about keeping up to date than other nations, and whether it's embarrassing to be a laggard, and much more. And that's in this edition of Prague Talk with Pavlína Louženská. Well, my first question is about your background. I understand a lot of your family are kind of technically minded, but your grandmother was a professor of English.
Yes, she actually spoke 7 languages, and she was an English teacher, German teacher. She was teaching them all. So she really is the linguistic part of my family. And when I was growing up, she was really my role model and inspiration for everything.
It must have been quite unusual to have a granny who was a professor of English in the coming days.
You know what was more unusual? To have a grandma who can't cook. She was not a typical grandma. She had 5 husbands. She never learned how to cook, and she had this amazing career, and she basically worked until she was 80. So there was something that was unusual to see such a strong woman who was in power her whole life.
You're a trend forecaster. It's such a cool sounding profession.
Yes.
How did you get into it?
Originally, I worked in marketing, and I started working in fashion in marketing. And there you are trying to guess what will sell 18 months ahead, because you have to order from the brands in order to sell 18 months later. And that's the first moment when you really started to dig deeper, and you're looking for any type of tools and ideas that give you more, like kind of that you are more sure about what you're going to buy. So that was my first moment when I explored it. And later on, I started digging deeper, and I started asking people questions. I got to this great conference. It's called Future Days. It happens every year, which is the biggest gathering of futurists. And that was the moment that I fell in love. And I said, this is what I want to do for my job.
To digress slightly for a second, you also have a project called Holky Marketingu, Girls for Marketing. What is that?
Yeah, I actually sold it last year, end of last year, and we built one of the biggest educational platforms in Central Eastern Europe. During the last 10 years, we managed to train over 25,000 women, and the goal was to teach women marketing to give them more opportunities in the job market. So our focus were people on maternity leave, or women who live in the regions where there's not so much work, and marketing is an industry that gives you more flexibility and very good opportunity for good pay. So that was our goal. Over 30% of our alumni went through scholarships. So we really tried to work on giving them better chances in life.
Also, I was reading that you were inspired to create this, at least in part, by Madeleine Albright.
Yes, it was at the time that I came across this famous quote by her, and that women should help other women. And there was a story when she became a foreign minister, how she gathered all the other female foreign ministers, and they created this community, and they promised each other they will always pick each other's phone. And it was the moment that I really needed. And also another part of that story was that I went to a conference at that time, like 10, 12 years ago, and I was always approached as a waitress. People thought I'm a waitress, and they asked me to bring them Coke or beer or something. And I was like, no, I'm actually one of the attendees. I'm one of the speakers here. I'm one of the people who are actually leading the industry. And it was really frustrating. And I realized one thing, that even though there are not so many women in tech marketing, we don't talk to each other. So I realized I want to keep touch. I want to organize lunches. I want to organize trainings for us, and I want us to empower each other.
About your trend forecasting, who are some of your clients, or who are your main clients or better known clients?
I have a lot of banking clients and insurance companies, of course. Also, I work a lot with clients who are in the B2C, so a changing, so it would be FMCG as well. But also what is interesting when I work with venture capitalists, because of course, when they are investing in startups, they really need to understand what is going to happen in 5, 10, 12 years. So that's one of my favorite parts, and it really combines with my other job. I work for Google for startups. I'm a mentor for Europe, Middle East and Africa. So I try to kind of get that insight from that field into my trend forecasting work. So it's usually a combination.
About trend forecasting, how do you do it? What are the methods that you use to predict the future as best you can?
I mean, the obvious answer here would be the crystal ball, but I'm sorry to say it's not that. I wish it would. On the other hand, there's a lot of work with data, but on the other side, there's a lot of work with intuition. I remember my first time meeting global trend forecasters, and we were on the call and I was asking them, so what kind of products you use, what kind of analytics you use? And they were like, I've been actually focused on wellness space for the last 30 years. I kind of know when something is happening, when something feels weird, something is picking up. And that's kind of what I call the intuition, But coming back to more data-based parts, there are more approaches, but one of them would be megatrends. So you see what is actually changing in the society, for example, aging society, climate change, urbanization. You can kind of predict where the world will go in 10, 20 years and what kind of consequences it's going to have. Another one is contradictions. So when something is really cool, like the white jeans, the skinny jeans are coming back. So it's always like back and forth, back and forth. Another part is, for example, you're looking at younger generations. So if Gen Z is doing something or Generation Alpha, probably your grandma is going to start to do it as well. So there are different approaches, and it really depends on what you are after. If you are a consumer brand and you are more asking like what the cool kids are going to use as makeup, you would use different frameworks or different tools, different strategies than if you're a bank and you're like trying to craft a strategy for 2030. Then you would be more focused on megatrends.
Generally speaking, if you can answer this, what's your hit rate in terms of how often do you feel like you're right in your predictions?
I actually looked into my predictions for last year and I asked AI tools to assess me, to give me a grade. And my average grade was 8 out of 10. So I think pretty decent hit rate considering where we are. What I focus on is actually Central Eastern Europe, because the biggest challenge in my field is that 90% of the trend reports are being released in 10 cities in the world, and the closest to Prague is actually Berlin. And there are no other trend forecasting agencies that are focused on our post-communist experience who take into consideration that our healthcare system or education system is different. And so often the companies I work with, they look at trend reports, but they're written for the UK market, US market. So I think what actually gives me a better success rate is the fact that I understand this market, that I'm really focused on that specific market in Europe.
How closely do trends here, for example, map trends in, say, Germany or other countries to the west of here? Are a lot of things very similar? Are there a lot of differences when it comes to trends?
Yes and no. You would have certain trends that come from the global market. So the fact that K-pop is so popular and it will be global and it will be something that is really perceived everywhere almost the same, and it's driven by the YouTubers and so on. And a lot of the trends, I call them that they're being cosplayed in a way. So you would have primarily US-based influencers, and they would start wearing certain shoes, behaving a certain way, and then we in Europe, we would be cosplaying those influencers, even though it doesn't really make sense in our market. I think a great example of this is a Stanley Cup, the thermo flask, which is designed for cars, and in Prague you don't really drive a car, but like still you would see the girls carrying it around because because it's one of those cosplay trends. On the other hand, you would have, for example, a different approach to sustainability in Czech market than in other markets, because Czechs are naturally quite excited about the nature, ecology, and so on. So it would be a very different approach to our behavior, what we consider ecological behavior compared to Western Europe or US.
What are some big trends now? I'm guessing something like doom and despair, and at least when I speak to people, everyone's fearing the future and afraid for the present.
Yeah, definitely one of the sentiments we see in the society is something that Edmund Lau, a fellow trend forecaster, called a dark mode. And it's this shift from optimism in the society, the fact that if you work out, if you really try hard, then we can make the world a better place. And now with Donald Trump, Ukraine, Gaza, all the kind of doom and gloom that is happening around us, we are giving up. Honestly, we are giving up. So you see much more darkness. You see the lack of diversity and inclusion initiatives. You see how we gave up on sustainability and the climate change. You see overall darkness in people. And there are different sentiments that are being tied to this main sentiment, and that is often coming back to the communities, really preparing for the worst within the community. Or another one would be something like training for the dark times. So you would see more people doing strength training and performance-oriented sports and so on. So different approaches that we really see. So that's one. Another one I see, and it's very natural. Trends are interesting because they often come in direct opposites. So on one side, you have this obsession with AI. Everything is AI. If you are not vibe coding 24/7, you're behind. On the other hand, you see a lot of people saying, I don't want this technology. I want to unplug. I want to have less time on screens. I want to go to the nature. You see a lot of young people exploring hiking, camping, and so on. So you would have all those kind of contrasts happening in the society at the same time.
Are there any positive trends that have excited you in recent times?
Yeah, definitely. The communities are a big thing for me, coming back and really looking for this human connection, how we keep talking in technology, how we need to automate everything, how the chatbots will be taking care of you, and all the very dystopic kind of data you see around it. For example, according to Dentsu, 1/3 of the people would let AI take care of their grandparents without any oversight. So this you see this whole automation of society and us really giving up on human connection. But on the other hand, you see more and more people coming back to each other. So, for example, I organized speed dating events for people to meet in real life, to be able to give up on Tinder. And we had over 400 signups overnight the moment we launched. Because you're craving that human intimacy, you're craving that connection, you're looking for this deep talk, and you want to go beyond the performative social media drama that we have been seeing in the last few years. Or one of my favorite conversations lately is about mental health and how authentic finally the conversation is.
If I wanted to be a trendsetter, what advice would you give me?
Start staring at people. There is a Japanese word, and it's called kukiboyomu, and it means reading the room. The fact that you are entering the room and you're hyper aware of what is happening in that room. You're looking at people, how they're dressed, what they're talking about. And this is basically what we do all the time. We are hyper aware of our environments, plus then we add the data to it. But you are constantly looking for something called signals. And those signals are signaling that this change is about to come. So one of the things what you can start doing is look at the cool people around you. And it doesn't need to be the kids. It can be anybody who you consider cool. What are they doing differently? What is it what is a hobby they picked up recently? What is it that they started wearing differently? And it's kind of that really allows you to learn that craft.
Are Czech people as focused, young people I guess, younger people, are they as focused on being cool as people might be in the States or UK or, I don't know, France?
Yes and no. The other day, my friend from Switzerland came to visit me here, and he was quite shocked, and he said he doesn't observe any trends in the streets. And he was asking me why. Like, is it that we don't follow? And one thing is that maybe you don't follow that much, but other thing is you don't have access to the brands. And it can be that a certain brand of blush is very cool, but if you can't buy it in the Czech Republic, then you can jump on that trend. So I think we are still battling this accessibility of products, that is it, and the disposable income that you can throw on those products.
But if you're speaking about appearance, no offense to Czech people, but I think they are less concerned than some nations.
Definitely. We are, when I try to explain people the Czech Republic, I often call Schweik, because it's this kind of easygoing nature. We are not so radical. When you look at American high school movies, then you either are a jock or a nerd. You kind of pick an identity, but we are not like big identity pickers. We are okay with not having this strong identity. We are kind of surfing in between, and I think that makes us really easygoing in a way. I don't know, you tell me, but if you observe this, but I think like we're this like kind of, let's have a beer and let's see what happens, And this is the same way how we approach trends.
That does sound pretty Czech. I was amused to read in an interview with you that the people who come to trends last are called laggards, which to me is a funny word just in itself. But is there any shame in being a laggard? I think I'm a bit of a laggard. I presume you're an early adopter of everything.
When we talk about this theory of adoption, I think it was developed in the 60s, so it's not something that is new. We always talk about the innovators who are at the beginning of the trend, and then the early adopters, the kind of cool kids and the YouTubers who start talking about it. Then you have the early majority, late majority, and then you have the laggards. But people think about it in a linear way. But actually, it's often a circle. So my dad is often the coolest person I know. He's often the first person to have the Salomon hiking shoes before all the cool kids have it, because he's usually the last one to have them. So it's kind of like very close to it. And also, I think there's another perspective to add to it. This laggard definition, it was very good when we had this monoculture, but now our culture is more and more falling apart, and we live in different bubbles. So what we see nowadays is that in some bubble, you can have something that is very cool and trending, and in some bubble, it's very cringe and obsolete. And that's my favorite part about trends nowadays. You always can find a bubble where you are very, very cool, no matter how laggardish you might feel in other ones.
Is it harder to keep up with trends as you get older? And is there a danger of kind of trying too hard and looking foolish? For example, whenever I go to London, I always see guys about 60 dressed like they're 20, and they're just trying too hard.
I mean, it's a midlife crisis. That's not trends, probably. But I understand what you're doing. I think like the inherent nature of trends is that you're always going to be cringe, no matter what, because the trends are so fast, and the word that describes trend work the most is zeitgeist, and it's zeit is the time that is changing constantly. Geist is the soul this is changing constantly. So maybe while we are doing this interview, the certain type of jeans is cool, but like in 2 weeks when it's released, it will not be cool anymore, and that's fine. It's like, I think that's why more and more we are having those discussions about authenticity, about personal style, about really understanding yourself and not following every bubble and hype there is.
If you Google Trend Brews, it says that you're AI powered, your organization. I presume you just have a positive view towards AI?
Yes and no. I mean, like in my work, it makes my life easier, because what I do is I do a meta-analysis of trend reports, and then I compare them to the local market. So I understand how Czech Republic is different than the other countries or CEE as a whole. So I that's the part of AI I use on a daily basis. On the other hand, what we see is that we are losing humanity because of AI. According to the latest data from Institute of Family Studies, it's an American institution, 42% of people claim that they like talking to AI more than they like talking to humans. 19% of people have already tried romantic relationships with AI. I'm really worried about it because it's so much easier to talk to AI that always tells you how smart and funny you are, and then you are suddenly coming back to human relationships and they seem hard, but they should seem hard. And that's why one of the biggest trends actually for this year is called friction maxing, where you are trying to learn how to work with friction and how not to give up on friction, because dealing with friction means dealing with humans. Does it make sense?
I think I could work it out if I thought about it for long enough. How far into the future are you typically looking?
So my typical client looks until 2030, usually not further because they're businesses. I have done work that looked into 2050, but honestly, it's fantasizing. I like to work with companies that can really apply what I'm working on, rather than thinking like about once we live on Mars. I think there are people who are much better than that. But 2030 is the usual time scope.
My final question, Pavlína. When I was preparing for this interview, I was reading about all your activities, and there are so many. You're on various supervisory boards, you sit on juries, you publish a newsletter, write for the media, do your main work. How do you balance all these things? How do you manage to achieve so much?
I'm really tired all the time, honestly, and I don't think I'm balancing it all. It would be a very dishonest answer to pretend that my inbox is not overflowing. It is, and I'm really grateful that I have great teams around me who are really trying to help me as much as they can. So I'm not alone on all these projects. There are big teams on all these projects, and that's what makes it possible.
Many thanks indeed to Pavlína Louženská for being my guest in this edition of Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. If you're new to the pod and enjoyed my chat with Pavlína, why not look up some of the earlier conversations in the series and subscribe to Prague Talk wherever you get your podcasts. But for now, that's all from me, Ian Willoughby. Thank you so much indeed for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.